Greetings! In this video I'm going to be painting up a little kitbash that I made, a Lieutenant in Terminator armour. The model itself is fairly simple, it's just the current Captain in Terminator armour, but I've replaced the helmet with a spare fully enclosed one, added an additional tilt shield, and replaced the crux on the back with an Ultimate glyph from the Ultramarines upgrade kit. This is going to be one of 2 lieutenants in my Ultramarines first company. Current chapter organisation states 2 lieutenants for each company, so I figured why not put one in Terminator armour. For the other first company lieutenant, I plan to use a lieutenant with a power sword model. To start, I primed the model black, then followed that with Macragge blue air paint. If you want to do this recipe yourself and don't have an airbrush, you can use Macragge blue spray primer instead. Strangely, my first step was to paint in the belt with Rhinox hide. I think the torso is very busy, so base coating in some of the finer details first can help make sense of the blur of blue. For the cloth and the purity seals, I used Zandri dust as a base coat. It took a few coats, as I wanted it to go on smooth. Next I used Abaddon black to paint in the undersuit details. There's not too many of these bits, but I missed some, which I'll get to later. For the silver details I used Iron Warriors. Details on the belt buckle, chains, the weapons, the vents, and the cables from the arms all received a base coat here. Sticking with my ad hoc order for painting things, I switched to the rocks on the base, using Steel Legion Drab to base coat them. I switched to a larger craft brush for these bits. I went back to Iron Warriors to paint in the rebar, and of course I missed one of the bits of rebar, but I'll go back to this colour later. Back to the cloth and purity seals. I used Ushabti bone and applied a thin layer over the raised bits. For the cloth, I laid it up with a bunch of lines, trying to give it a rough cloth look. A final highlight was done with Screaming Skull, doing the same as the Ushabti bone, but in a smaller area. Back to the leather, I used Scrag Brown to paint in some highlights, and tiny scratches on the belt. I followed that with Deathclaw Brown, repeating the process in a smaller area. Returning my attention to the rocks on the base, I used Storm Vermin Fur to highlight, hitting a lot of the surface, but making sure to leave the previous colour visible. For the final highlight I used Dawnstone. I did near the edges and painted in some weird shapes to make some additional depth. I think the result looks appropriately concrete. For the Purity Seal wax I used Wordbearer's Red as a base coat. I thinned this way too much. To highlight the wax I used Pink Horror, painting around the edges and doing a little dot in the middle. Now for some white bits. Using Ulthorn Grey I painted in the right knee pad, which I'll put a blue Ultima marking on later. I also painted in the white bit of the stripe, which is typical for lieutenants. The Ultima on the back and the pauldron trim were also painted at this stage. I went back to the same colours that I used for the cloth to do the skull inside the Ultima symbol. Now for the gold. I used Retributor armour and painted in all the bits I wanted gold. The Imperialis, the end of the belt, the reliquary, plate on the pauldron, the elbow trim, the Ultima trim, the skulls on the elbows and the hands, and the other bits which you can see. We're slowly getting there. Next I used Mephiston red to base coat the casing of the Combi-Melta, as well as paint in the eye lenses and do the red stripe on the helmet. I also painted in the targeter lens, as well as the little halo things on his elbows with this red. I went back in with Abaddon black and Iron Warriors to get some of the bits I missed before. Not sure how I missed the helmet details like this, but here we are. Back to the red, I used Evil Sun's Scarlet to highlight all of the previously painted red bits. Sticking with the lenses for now, I used Wild Rider red to highlight the eyes and the targeters. I followed that with Luggenough orange to help them stand out nicely. This is pretty much just a little dot. Next I used gloss varnish over the bits that I intended to use for decals later, just giving it time to cure while I paint the other bits. Now for the Crux Terminatus, the main one on his shoulder and whatever the one on his knees called. I went back to one of the few recipes I saved when I was starting out. A base coat of Mechanicus Standard Grey was applied, painting around the little red gem that I filled in earlier, off camera. I followed that with two highlights, Dawnstone, then Administratum Grey. These are applied on the raised bits, one after the other, in thinner amounts. For the skull here, I highlighted the top part, as well as around the eye sockets, the nose hole and the teeth. I applied the decals off camera. I cut an Iron Halo decal in half for use on the tilt shield, and I placed the other half over the top of the Ultima glyph on the armorial, as a nod to the Lieutenant marking. Any other markings were just applied where I thought they looked good. Next I went in and highlighted with Calgar blue. I kept this till now as I didn't know how much of the armour would remain blue. I've not painted too many Terminators before. I think this is my 9th of the current scale, though I did 5 of the older scale a decade ago, when I was just dabbling in the hobby. I only started doing this more seriously in 2023, just before 10th edition launched. Anyway, the approach here is just to hit the edges and do some scratches, not worrying about making a mess. That being said, I am trying to get better at doing finer edge highlights, so I am trying to make it look nice. It just doesn't matter here, as I'll be applying weathering over the top later. Back to the gold, I use Seraphim Sepia as a wash. I love the look this gives, especially when you go on fairly heavy. Back to Abaddon black for the scribbles on the parchment. The pen I usually use is great, but I need to get better with the brush. After the wash on the gold was dry, I used Liberator Gold to apply some highlights. I think I went a bit too strong here, but it gets toned down later. Similar to the gold, I used Runefang steel to highlight the silver. This looks great over the darker Iron Warrior's metal, providing a nice contrast between the two. As the paint dried on the brush, I used that to my advantage and dry brushed it over the sword. I'd avoid this with a newer brush, but this one's on its way out, so I'm not fussed. Happy with how I did the power sword on the Blood Raven I did recently, I decided to try that again. I used Temple Guard blue to paint in some lightning on the sword. I then used Baharroth blue to highlight, kimming it to the middle of the arcs. Like with the Runefang steel, I used the dried paint to dry brush some sort of energy over it. I think this helped. Back to the armour now. I used Fenrisian grey to get an even brighter edge highlight. This was mainly over the top facing edges. I then went back to Runefang steel to paint in some of the rivets I missed. Now for weathering. I used Rhinox hide and applied tiny scratches and dots all over the armour, focusing on the edges and anywhere I didn't like the highlights I'd applied earlier. After chipping, I used an enamel pin wash to shade all the recesses of the armour, as well as darkening down some of the bits that were too bright. Enamels like this do wonders to bring a paint job together. While I was looking over the paint job, I noticed the lighting was looking a bit weird, so I went in with blue horror to help it stand out a bit more. Maybe this could have been helped by using a darker teal as well, around the edges, but I think this did well enough. Happy with how it was looking, I did my usual basing method off camera, and applied an Ultramatte varnish. And here we have it, my custom Ultramarines 1st Company Lieutenant and Terminator armour. This one came out really nicely, if I do say so myself. It had a lot of little details all over it, which definitely complicated the model, but I'm super pleased with the result. The kit bash is pretty simple. Some people wouldn't even consider it one, but I figured going simple would work here, especially as the model is unique in my force, my Terminator Captain being the push-fit one from the Leviathan launch box. The weathering and the enamel tied the model together nicely. The only thing I can think of to improve would have been putting some heat scorching on the melter barrel, but that's not necessary. Here he is next to my 1st Company Captain, Severus Agemum. When I got the Leviathan launch box, the captain inside was literally a Agemum, so of course I had to paint him as such. I think they look good together, despite being painted a year apart. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm not sure what my next video will be yet. I've got a few things ready, but I might do a Space Wolf miniature. My army box finally arrived. I'll figure something out. Hopefully you stick around for the next one.